Hello, welcome to your favorite storytelling channel. Let me introduce you to Roberto, a 40-year-old man who works as a taxi driver. He's the kind of person who loves what he does, you know. For him, driving isn't just a job. It's a chance to meet new people, hear fascinating stories, and sometimes even give advice to those who need it. He always says that his car is more than a taxi. It's almost a confessional on wheels. But behind his welcoming smile and friendliness toward his passengers, Roberto's life has been quite challenging. He's a widower, having lost his wife unexpectedly when their son was still young. Since then, he's taken on the role of both father and mother at the same time, doing everything possible and impossible to raise his son alone. Now, the boy has grown up and become an adult, but Roberto still feels the weight of everything he's had to face. And as if that weren't enough, financial problems are a daily struggle. The competition in transportation, the high cost of fuel, taxes, and car maintenance leave Roberto with little money at the end of the month. He has thought about quitting a few times, but his love for his job and the need to pay the bills always keep him going. In addition, the heavy routine of driving for hours and hours every day is taking a toll on his health. Roberto feels constant pain in his body, especially in his back and neck, and the stress never seems to let up. Sometimes he wakes up so tired that he doesn't know how he's going to face another day, but he does it anyway. He believes that each passenger who gets into his taxi can teach him a lesson or a special moment that makes it all worthwhile. Deep down, Roberto is an example of resilience. He has his difficulties, but he never loses his will to live and make a difference. His biggest dream? To have a day off without worries, where he can simply rest and enjoy the company of his son. Until then, he continues his journey, driving through the city streets with the hope of better days and the certainty that his story still has a lot to be written. Now imagine this. It is a calm night, one of those where the silence seems even louder than the noises of the city. Roberto had just dropped off a passenger and was heading home, already thinking about a well-deserved rest, when something caught his attention. There, in the middle of a deserted road, he saw an elderly woman. She was alone, disoriented, wearing a white dress that seemed to shine under the dim light of the streetlights. Roberto, being the kind man that he is, stopped the taxi immediately. As he approached, he noticed that the woman was confused, as if she had just woken up from a strange dream. He tried to talk to her, asked her name, where she had come from, where she was going, but she simply didn't know. The only thing that seemed clear was that she needed help, and Roberto knew he couldn't leave her there. "Let's go to the police station," he suggested in a calm and welcoming tone. "They can help you find out where you live, or who can pick you up." The lady, even though confused, accepted the invitation and got into the taxi, sitting in the back seat with a lost look in her eyes. During the journey, something strange began to happen. Roberto couldn't take his eyes off the rearview mirror, where he could see her face. It was as if he already knew her, as if that woman were a figure from some forgotten corner of his memory. He tried to start a conversation again, but her answers remained vague, almost as if she were talking about things from another time, another place. As he drove, Roberto's mind was racing. Who is this woman? Where could he know her from? The feeling of familiarity was so strong that it seemed to scream inside him. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't put the pieces of the puzzle together. The dark road, the silence inside the taxi, and the mysterious presence of that lady created an atmosphere that was both intriguing and slightly frightening. Roberto wasn't one to be easily impressed, but he felt that that night was far from normal. He kept driving with the feeling that this encounter was not just a coincidence. It was as if life had put that woman in his path for some reason he still didn't understand. What would he discover when he got to the police station? And more importantly, who was that lady in the white dress really? Roberto didn't know, but he had the feeling that his life was about to change. Did you know that Roberto's life has a lot of interesting stories? He's the kind of person who has been through so much that it almost seems like a movie. It all started when he was still little. After his mother died, he went to live with his father and stepmother, Suzana. But look, his relationship with Suzana was never good. She was the kind of person who made Roberto feel out of place, you know? So when things got really tough, his grandmother stepped in like a true heroine. She took him to live with her, and it was there that Roberto finally found love and security. When he got older, Roberto met Marley, the first great love of his life. They were very happy together and made plans for a beautiful future, but their relationship faced a major obstacle. Donna Auxiliadora, Marley's mother. She was controlling and complained about every detail of their lives. Every decision, every step that Marley and Roberto wanted to take together, Donna Auxiliadora was there to criticize or interfere. In the end, this ended up wearing their relationship down so much that they broke up. Roberto was heartbroken, but he learned to move on. Later, he decided he wanted to help people and became a teacher. At first, he loved the profession. Teaching was his passion, and he had a special way of making students feel motivated. But not everything was a bed of roses. At work, Roberto had to deal with a colleague who seemed to do everything she could to make his life difficult. She was competitive, negative, and sometimes even disrespectful. Over time, the toxic environment began to take its toll, and Roberto realized that the environment was not healthy for him. That's when he made a courageous decision. He left the classroom and decided to change paths. That's how Roberto the taxi driver was born. He got behind the wheel and made it his new workmate. At first, it wasn't easy. He had to learn everything about the city's traffic, deal with all kinds of passengers, and, of course, face financial uncertainty. But little by little, he found a new passion in the taxi. Driving through the streets, meeting people, and listening to stories became an important part of his life. Every choice, every twist and turn along the way, shaped Roberto into the resilient man he is today. Even with the difficulties, he carries the lessons of the past with pride and uses everything he learned to face the challenges of the present. Just imagine, as Roberto drove towards the hospital with that mysterious lady sitting in the back seat, the silence in the taxi seemed full of unsaid things. Then, suddenly, she started talking. But it wasn't just any conversation. The sentences she said were like loose pieces of a puzzle. "Life is full of regrets, isn't it?" she murmured, looking out the window. "Sometimes, people make mistakes without knowing how much they will hurt others." Roberto felt a shiver run down his spine. This seemed very personal. He tried not to show it, but something inside him was screaming. He knew this woman. Who was she? Why did her words seem so connected to something from her past? When they arrived at the hospital, the situation took an unexpected turn. While she was being treated, the doctors began to suspect signs of abuse and called the police. It was then that the truth began to emerge. The woman had been held captive for years by her own children. They had falsified documents, stolen all her money, and left her isolated with no one to help her. It was like a story from a movie, but it was happening right before Roberto's eyes. The police acted quickly and arrested the children for abuse and forgery of documents. The woman, now calmer, began to tell her story in more detail. It was then that the moment Roberto would never have expected came. She looked directly at him, her eyes full of tears, and said, "I need to tell you something, Roberto. My name is Suzana." Roberto's heart almost stopped. Suzana, the stepmother who had made his childhood hell? He was speechless as she continued. "I know I was cruel to you in the past. I did things that still deeply shame me. I was a different person back then, full of anger and frustrations that I took out on someone who was not to blame, on you. But time taught me to see all of that. And now I'm here, asking for forgiveness." Roberto was silent for a few seconds, trying to process everything. The woman he barely recognized, who seemed so fragile and vulnerable, was now someone who carried deep regrets for past mistakes. He took a deep breath, feeling a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a hint of compassion. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive right now," he said, his voice low but firm. "But the fact that you recognize your mistakes is already a start." Suzana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Roberto. I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry." That night, Roberto returned home with more questions than answers. His life had taken such a turn that it seemed impossible to believe. But deep down, he knew that this meeting, as painful as it was also a chance to start over, to let the past rest and perhaps make room for a different future. After everything that had happened, Roberto and Suzana had a conversation that would change their lives forever. Sitting on a bench in the hospital, she began to open her heart, her eyes filled with tears and her voice trembling. Roberto, you may not believe it, but what I experienced with my own children was worse than any nightmare. They stole everything I had, isolated me, and left me alone for years. During that time, trapped in that house, I only had my thoughts. And they were cruel to me because they reminded me of the people I hurt, especially you. Roberto remained quiet, listening attentively, but his expression was that of someone carrying conflicting emotions. Suzana continued, in that solitude, I realized how unfair I was to you. I was bitter, frustrated, and I took everything out on the wrong place. You were just a child, and even so, I didn't treat you with the love and respect you deserved. I'm sorry, Roberto. I really am. Roberto took a deep breath. He never thought he would hear those words from the woman who, for so long, had been synonymous with pain and rejection. Suzana, he said calmly, life has a strange way of teaching lessons, doesn't it? I spent years being angry with you, but I also learned that holding on to resentment doesn't change the past. It only makes the present heavier. I forgive you, not because it's easy, but because I believe everyone deserves a chance to make amends. Suzana cried, and in that moment, something changed between them. They were no longer stepmother and stepson, stuck in a past of hurt. They were just two people trying to find peace and redemption. After that day, Roberto and Suzana began to rebuild their relationship. Although they weren't as close as mother and son, they found a way to connect. Roberto visited Suzana often, helped with shopping, and was always available to talk. Suzana, in turn, used each meeting to express gratitude and try to make up for past mistakes. As the years passed, Suzana began to face health problems. Roberto was by her side through every appointment, every treatment. He did this not out of obligation, but because he knew that by forgiving her, he had freed his heart from a burden he had carried since childhood. When Suzana passed away 5 years later, Roberto was surprised by something she had left him: all of her possessions. She left a letter with her will in which she wrote, Roberto, I cannot change what I did in the past, but I can use what I have left to thank you for your kindness and for forgiving me. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Thank you for giving me a chance to make amends. Roberto was moved. It was not because of the money or the possessions, but because of the sincerity and reconnection they had built. He used part of the inheritance to pay off debts and make improvements to his taxi, but he donated most of it to organizations that help underprivileged children. If I can help someone have a better childhood, he would say, then it was worth it. Even with the inheritance, Roberto decided to continue driving a taxi. He loved what he did. For him, each day behind the wheel was a new chance to learn, meet people, and, who knows, make a difference in someone's life. He became known in the city not only for being a caring driver, but also for his wise conversations. Forgiveness is not easy, but it's like taking a suitcase full of stones off your back, he would often tell his passengers. You feel lighter, freer. Life is too short to carry grudges. He inspired many passengers with his story, especially those who were going through difficult situations. For Roberto, each passenger was an opportunity to spread a little light. Roberto also started writing down his experiences in a notebook. He wrote down stories from his passengers, their thoughts on forgiveness, and even memories from his childhood. One day, a local writer discovered his notes and encouraged him to publish them. The book, titled On the Roads of Life, Lessons from a Taxi Driver, became an unexpected success. Roberto never imagined that his life, full of ups and downs, could inspire so many people. But there he was, driving through the streets with a light heart and a clear mission: to live with gratitude, spread kindness, and above all, remember that even the most difficult moments can bring something good. Roberto's story teaches us that forgiveness is a powerful choice, and that even in the midst of difficulties, there is always a chance to start over. And so we come to the end of Roberto's story, a journey full of challenges, twists and turns, and lessons that touch the heart. From his difficult childhood to moments of reconciliation and redemption, Roberto showed us that life, no matter how complicated it may seem, always offers a chance to start over. The message is clear. Forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened, but about freeing our hearts from the weight of the past. It's like letting go of a rope that's holding you back, allowing you to move forward. Roberto knew this, and that's why he chose the hardest, but also most liberating path. He forgave Suzana not only for her sake, but for himself, because he understood that holding a grudge would be like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to suffer. After forgiving Suzana, Roberto found more than peace. He found purpose. His experience taught him that every day is an opportunity to learn, grow, and make a difference, even in the simplest things like driving a taxi. He turned the steering wheel into his tool for connecting with the world, listening to stories from passengers, sharing words of wisdom, and spreading kindness wherever he went. Suzana, for her part, also found redemption in the last years of her life. She couldn't undo the mistakes of the past, but she did everything in her power to show that she had changed. When she left her inheritance to Roberto, it wasn't just money or possessions. It was a symbol of her gratitude, an acknowledgement that he was the most worthy person to receive the fruit of a life she had tried to correct. The impact of this story goes beyond what happened between them. Roberto, with his philosophy of life, began to inspire everyone around him. He became almost a legend among his passengers. Whoever got into his taxi left with something more than a ride. They left with a life lesson. People began to talk about the forgiving taxi driver, the man who transformed pain into wisdom and hurt into kindness. Over time, Roberto also decided to share his story more widely. He began giving lectures at schools, community centers, and churches, telling how forgiveness changed his life. He spoke about Suzana, about his difficult childhood, about the lessons he learned from each passenger, and always concluded with a powerful message. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It is the path to peace. But Roberto didn't stop there. He used part of Suzana's inheritance to create a small foundation dedicated to helping children and young people in vulnerable situations, especially those who face family difficulties, as he did in the past. He wanted to ensure that no one had to go through the same challenges alone. Ultimately, Roberto's story is much more than a story of hardships. It is proof that life can be transformed when we choose forgiveness, resilience, and gratitude. No matter how difficult the path may be, there is always a way to transform pain into strength and suffering into learning. Now, before we close, I want to invite you to reflect. Do you also carry some weight that you no longer need to carry? Perhaps a grudge, a hurt, or a pain from the past. Remember Roberto and his journey. Letting go of what holds you back can be the key to living a lighter and happier life. If this story touched you, share it with someone who also needs to hear this message. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories. Let's spread the message together that forgiveness is the bridge to peace and that each day is a new chance to start over. Until next time.